Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's episode of That Solo Life, the podcast for PR pros and marketers who work for themselves. People like me, Michelle Kane with Voice Matters, my wonderful co host, Karen Swim of Solo PR Pro, and it's another guest day. Yay! Today we are joined by Kara Ryan of Clear Strategies. Kara has spent a couple of decades in the private sector in some highly regulated areas, but she's recently struck out on her own, and we're going to talk about her journey and all the great things she's up to. So, welcome, Kara. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing wonderful. Thank you all so much for having me.
Good.
We
Oh,
are delighted to welcome you
yes.
and welcome to the Solo PR Pro universe. We love
Thank
that.
Yes, thank you. I'm quite new to it, about 5-ish, almost 6 weeks in. So haven't learned everything, but I can tell you I've learned a lot.
We love that fresh perspective though, and that's so helpful because I think, we'll dig into this, but I think that many other people out in the audience are going to want this real time insight from somebody that may have just stepped into what they're thinking about right now.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to provide it. And it's such an interesting time to be doing this for a lot of reasons, right? Economically, job
Mhm.
market, the AI of it all. It's just a really interesting time to be making this leap. But yeah, happy to share what I've gained so far, and certainly don't claim to be expert on any of it. But
Oh.
yeah, and would certainly love your insights as we navigate the conversation.
Nice.
Well, you said you've always envisioned yourself, making your own schedule and being your own boss. And
Yeah.
even with that, you did spend a good amount of time in the corporate world, which is great. But
Yeah.
what made you finally decide, or, was it a slow burn decision? What led you to leave it behind for the solo world?
Yeah, it was actually a little bit of both, Michelle. A little slow burn, but
Mhm.
also a little bit of the moment kind of struck me as a perfect time. So when I say it was a slow burn, I
Mhm.
mean like really slow. As a kid, I guess I never considered working for anyone else as a kid. I always just thought I'm going to be my own
Mhm.
boss. I didn't know exactly what that would be. I had sort of writing and journalistic tendencies as a kid. And so I kind of always thought, oh, I'll be a writer. Life happens to all of us. So went to school for journalism and came out of school at a time like in the early 2000s when journalism, even now, right, is not the journalism of yesteryear, right? So it's really tough to get a gig there, but wasn't tough as tough at least to get a good gig in PR. So I ended up in a comms role right out of school for corporation, and 20 years later I hadn't left. And part of that was, I think, like probably a lot of people listening to this thinking about making the jump, is just the security of it, right? So um well, the perceived security of it, the same pay that's coming in every couple of weeks, the benefits, the health insurance, things like that, that do make it actually really tough to leave. And so I think I'll admit I'm a couple years now into my 40s, and I think hitting 40 for me was really a moment of reflection on career wise, also just life wise. But even, when it came to my
Mhm.
career, do I want the back half of my career to look like the front half? And I kind of decided at that point, it really was about a little over 2 years ago, that I said to myself, I think I want it to look different. I really do think there's going to be a time for me soon to make the jump, do my own thing. So I actually did file all the paperwork with my, Secretary of State to get my company, legal and all that about 2 years ago. But honestly, it took me that long to sort of work up the preparation and almost the strength, if you will, to sort of finally make the leap. Um, yeah, and it's been an interesting time to have done that, but I actually think in some ways in a lot of ways, a really great time for me personally to do it.
You hit on something that I think is really important. You use this phrase that I love, perceived security,
Mhm.
because I think that that is one of the things that holds people back from jumping into a solo career because they
Yeah.
see corporate employment as stable, secure. But history has told us, at least recent history. Now, in prior times and, prior generations, that's been true. You could work at the same job until you retired. You could be there for 25 years. That's no longer true. And we're seeing displacement and layoffs and jobs being restructured very quickly. So is it secure? So I'm interested in what finally clicked for you that you were able to overcome that mindset of the perception of security and decide to create your own thing, which is actually more secure because you can pivot whenever you want to. You can do whatever you want when you're a solo. You're not bound by, these boxes. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, you actually hit on it right there. Is I think two things really is one is I think just as you described, what used to be security is now really no longer, right? So across every industry, but certainly affecting those of us that have worked in comms and marketing and PR, we're being squeezed a lot. The roles in companies are being squeezed out, either for budget reasons, for, AI might be able to help do some of that. And we're seeing people that are on the job market, really talented, experienced, mid senior level people looking for jobs for 6, 9, 12, sometimes 18 months or more. And so, I'm the type of person, I did do a lot of different roles in my 20-year corporate career for different companies. And I kind of usually around the 18-month mark, started to get the itch. And by 2.5 years was, hoping to be in my next gig. May have been the same company, often was. And so I think at that point in the company I was just at, I was sort of at that moment where I was kind of like, okay, I'm getting the itch. But when you look at the market out there for other roles, it's really dire. It's really tough. Again, even with people that are really seasoned and have great experience, it's just really hard. And so exactly what you just said, I said to myself, the security that we've perceived is really not there anymore. And I could create that security for myself, a different type of security, if you will. So it's still, it's all on me now. So there's a completely different kind of calculus, I guess, that goes along with it. But I'm in charge, right? I'm secure because I decide how I spend my days, how I choose clients, how I make my money, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it was a combination of the two things exactly, Karen, that you just touched on, was the realization that security really isn't so secure anymore necessarily in the corporate gigs. And I could create some sense of security for myself. So yeah, I think it was the right time for me. And I think, again, I'm very early in the mix, but I really still believe that this was a perfect time to do this for me.
Well, it's so true. So true. I think so many of us loved that security of the direct deposit. I mean, I thought I'd always be a direct deposit girl. And here we are. And I think that was certainly my realization in my journey, was that's not even secure. So, don't delude yourself. But you are in this now for several weeks and counting, more than that, about 6 weeks. And so this might be kind of early to ask this question, but what's already surprised you about solo life that maybe you didn't anticipate when you were thinking about how it would look?
Yeah, I mean, where do I begin? I think I would say thematically, I would say the word structure comes to mind. And when I say that, I guess I mean it in kind of a couple of different ways. One really is, again, coming from corporate, there's a lot of structure that's sort of built into that for you, right? So whether you work in an office or from home or in a hybrid, and I've done all, there's a structure in where you're sitting day to day and what time you're sitting there and, who you're interacting with, that really isn't there right now as a solopreneur. So I'm working remotely from home right now, but later today I might be in a coffee shop. I'm on phone calls, with people that I've never met before that I'm doing outreach to. That's just different, right? There's a different structure to my days. So I think when I jumped in and when I made the leap, I thought, I'll keep my standard, be at my desk 9-ish to 5-ish, and I think the hours I'm working are roughly the same. I really probably should look very closely at that, but the blocks of time aren't, right? So I'm not here consistently 9 to 5. I might be here, 9 to noon and then take a break, go do something else around the house, go run errands. And then knowing me, I'm a night owl. So I'll have an idea or something will strike me at 8 p.m. and I'll find myself then at midnight still cranking that out. So I think the structure has been different for me. And I sort of anticipated like, it'll be the same. And it hasn't. And then when I say structure in a sort of second way, it's truly like how you structure your business can have such implications. And I thought I did really pretty robust research into sort of the legal ways to structure a business. And I landed fine. I'm fine. I've done research to make sure I'm fine. I've talked to people, lawyers to make sure I'm fine. But like I'm learning now, if I had structured something slightly differently or added on a different type of structure, an S Corp, for example, you're looking at sort of different tax implications for yourself, right? And as 6 weeks in, I don't yet have a full glimpse at what my income's going to look like. So do I pull those triggers or don't I? So when I say structure, I really mean it in a couple ways, but I think both of those things have been a bit surprising. I kind of just thought, I'm going to work for myself. Taxes will be just pretty straightforward, and nothing is. Nothing is as straightforward as you want it to be. But yeah, I would say the structure of it all, I think, has really been surprising to me early on. And I'm sure there's, a lot more surprises to come, but that's kind of what I've sussed out so far.
I think that's a pretty common reaction too. And it's because you don't think of yourself you think of yourself as the worker, right? Because you're coming out of being an employee. So you're an employee. So you think about all of the things that means. You get a paycheck, you have health insurance, and you know about benefits, but then you have to think about the structure that provided all of those things to you. Like, I need to figure out my computer problems or have some kind of a plan. And, I am the employer who also is paying employment taxes. Like, what does that side of the house really look like? Because you don't really know, right? Until you're in it. How much is going to go to that? Like you have no idea. So it's definitely not like being an employee and having it taken out so nice and neat. And you look at your net. It's like, no, you're responsible for the employer side of the house now. And you're responsible for those, health benefits and, your retirement. And so, that part can be very new, but I think, you've done the right things by getting the right counsel. And going into it eyes open, and you're prepared because you're, looking at it and understanding it right from the beginning.
Yeah,
absolutely.
As close to the beginning as we could.
Right, exactly. And you know what? 5 years from now, you'll look back and you'll go, "Oh, look how far I've come." But
I hope so. But and nothing that's been surprising has been scary so far. I think it's kind of like, a realization moment rather than a scary, I should have done something completely different moment. So that's been comforting. Nothing's upended, or completely turned my business upside down. But there's some surprises for sure.
I love that. It gets more surprising, but in an exciting way. Like, the things that you get to do. I think, you talked about this a little bit, but I think I was that person too. I was, 2.5 years and I was off to the next thing. I love that as a solo, you can add or take away things that make sense for you. You could do it on every client engagement if you felt like it. And then over time, if you build a team and add people, you can delegate the things that don't light you up and keep just enough hours for the things that you truly are passionate about. And I think what a joy to be able to do that. So you really can change your job as often as you want to. And we've had solos become journalists who became comms consultants. We have people who have gone on to teach, who have started AI companies, who have become yoga teachers. I mean, there's just a wide variety of pivots that people have made. And I love that, flexibility and ability to adjust your hours in every season of your life. If you have small kids, you may want to work less. If you, have an empty nest, you may want to work more or not. It could be the opposite. Or just,
Yeah.
when seasons are busy, you may want to, work a little less in the summer, and you can structure your client engagement so that you have that downtime. So you're going to love it. Those are the good surprises that'll come your way, just how great it all feels and how it's not as hard as we think it is when we're in corporate America. It seems so scary.
Yeah.
But it really isn't.
Yeah. And I think to your point around, how you structure your time in slower seasons and busier seasons is, for me also, like, I love to travel, and my family happens to live, 1,500 miles away from me, my parents, my sister. So I like to visit them, ideally 3-4 times a year. And, it used to mean taking 3 or 4 days off of work to be able to really spend my time there. Or I'm sitting in my parents' house, glued to the computer because I want my Teams light to be green and everybody knows I'm online. And I think that's a realization for me too, is I can now do those trips. And sure, I will be working partially there, but there's no one sort of keeping tabs on me being, in my seat at certain times. It just feels like a little more freedom. That's something that's, for me, who loves spending time with my family and doesn't get to do it as much as I'd like, is going to be a huge benefit for me.
I love that.
Definitely.
We have some solos who have said that they really don't take formal vacations because they just travel a lot and do whatever they want, and they have their laptop, so work can get done, but they don't, they feel like they're always on vacation. And that's beautiful when we're able to do that.
It is. Yeah. Good for them. But and the beauty of operating the way that we do is you find, the larger the organization, the slower it takes to change direction of the ship, whereas we can pivot in a nanosecond. So let's talk about your approach to your business. You described your approach as advisor-led and AI, oh my gosh, hello, AI powered, advisor-led and AI powered. Goodness gracious. So tell us what that means in practice as you work with your clients, and why you decided to just say, like, hey, AI's here and I'm using it, which is great.
It's very intentional that I lead with that. It's very upfront on my website, sort of in my LinkedIn, the content that I create. I acknowledge advisor-led, AI powered, and I really mean it, and in several ways actually. And I think some people maybe are reluctant to showcase that they're using AI in their business or in their work. We know a lot of people are, and they're sort of not acknowledging it, and that's okay. I wanted to be upfront about it because I want clients to know how I'm using it. So I want them to ask me, "Hey, you say advisor-led, AI powered. What are you doing with AI? How's that going to help me?" And for me, it's a couple things. Is really getting me smarter, faster. Knowing more information about a client before I even meet with them. Right, doing really deep research on where they are as a person, but where their company is, where they've been, where they're going. So I get like a daily media scan every morning at 7 a.m. An email gets sent to me with kind of the goings on in a very super customized niche that I've asked AI to focus on. And that same daily briefing that comes to me tells me, here's what your day looks like today. Here's where your business development stands in terms of who you need to reach out today and follow up with, what's happened since your last follow up with that client. So a lot of it for me is like letting AI do work, honestly, while I'm sleeping. That would take me, an hour or two, maybe more, when I got up that morning. So things that just are delivered to me that make me smarter and faster, that really don't have anything to do necessarily with creation of work, but actually make me smarter, so that when I do create the work, it's well-informed, well-intentioned, and I'm not spending a ton of time researching necessarily. So I'm looking at AI to manage sort of a lot of the thinking behind what goes into me doing, if that makes sense. So I still plan to do a lot of the doing on the client work. I'm not going to ask any AI tools to help me. I'm not going to ask them to say, craft a comms plan for this client. That won't happen. What I will ask them for is, I've crafted this comms plan. I have these messages, act as a hostile investor and tell me how a hostile investor might react to this message set, right? That's something that's really, would cost a lot of money and research to do without these tools. But it's not AI crafting things for me. It's AI making me smarter on what I've crafted. So that's kind of one way that I'm using it. And I guess the other one is really, when I say advisor led and AI powered, I say advisor led because I want it to be clear, especially with the types of clients that I'm working with. A lot of them med tech, healthcare, regulated industries that are, looking at the FDA or even the SEC that are looking at them. I want to make sure the information I'm using to help craft comms plans for them is secure and safe and is not being used to train these AI tools. So I'm investing, in the paid versions that get me up to a level where I know the data is secure with me, not being used to train the models. And that way I can confidently tell clients, hey, I am, working with AI to help craft. I'm using data that you've provided me, but rest assured, it's secure, it's safe, it's not being used so that your competitor can go into ChatGPT and find out what your launch plan is. That will not happen because of the investments and the care that I'm taking to make sure that data is secure. It's really important to me that, especially with these big moments that I'm kind of focusing on for them. So whether they're looking at a product launch or a leadership transition, things that need to be kept under wraps until they're ready to be revealed are not just out there for anyone to find.
I love that. And you talked about the big moments. So you've worked in highly regulated environments, and I'm guessing that you are now carrying forward that experience into your solo PR pro career. So as you look back at some of these very high stake communication situations that you've been in, what are some of the things or one thing that you wish more companies understood before those situations happen?
Oh man, the list is there. I will say, I guess the one thing I would say I wish most companies understood, and this applies really to tiny companies, medium size, every size company, is I think a lot of leaders go, okay, we want to, we've made a big decision. We've decided to, acquire something, sell something, make a change to our leadership team. We've decided to launch a product. Now let's communicate it. And that's when people like me, historically get brought in often. Right. And I think it's not ill-intentioned, but it's too late. Right. So people like us in PR and communications can do a lot more good if we're brought to the table when the discussion around the decision is actually happening rather than the decisions made now communicate it. Because at that point, we've missed opportunities to sort of gauge the vibe in the room, if you will. What are people saying? What's the leadership team saying about this decision? Are they all really behind it? And if not, what are their hesitations so that we can craft, communications that marry up to that and address some of those concerns. When we're brought in late, we may be handed a decision that we know, a competitor just communicated news 2 weeks ago that really is going to make this look bad. Or, employees are really having a hard time right now and you're about to communicate that you're, I don't know, making investments in something that they don't think is really important. So I think the earlier that comms is brought to the table, and I know I'm singing to the choir here if there's communications folks listening that have worked in a corporation, but the earlier we can be brought in, the better. And it's not just I need a seat at the table from an ego perspective. It truly is. We can actually help form and inform that decision so that it lands in the way a team wants it to, rather than in the middle of chaos or something that a news landscape or media landscape that's just really not a good time for them to make that type of announcement. So I would say the one thing is comms early at the table as early as possible.
So true. So true. I used to say, I don't need to know everything. Like you said, it's not ego driven. Oftentimes I could care less personally, but I need to know everything.
Yeah.
So, so we can troubleshoot, prepare, point things out that might have been in their, blind spots that could really save them a lot of agony later. So that's, yeah. If only our corporations and organizations could embrace that. We're not
Yeah.
needy. We're just trying to save you some heartache.
Yeah. And I mean, to build on that a little bit, Michelle, is we're thinking about audiences besides maybe just the one audience that that team has in mind, right? So, depending on the type of moment we're talking about, if it's, a leadership transition and there's a new, C-suite member coming in, they may be thinking, oh, how's the investment community going to take this? I'll be thinking about that too, but I'll also be thinking about, yeah, but how are those people that you walk around the halls with every day going to be feeling about this?
Yep.
And, we know they can be just as important in terms of being ambassadors or, potentially not for your organization. So it's really about, considering all the different kind of audiences and what they need to take away from it, rather than, I think sometimes leaders are making decisions based on, one kind of key audience in mind. Not that they're intentionally ignoring the others, it's just not a focus. And I think we as communicators are thinking about all the different publics, internal, external, everyone that can potentially, get a reaction from this news. And I think that's a perspective that we kind of uniquely bring from communications.
Yeah, I love that. You've said before, because we had a chance to talk before the podcast, and you said that sometimes communicating less is actually better. So talk about what you think is right size communication. What does that look like? And how do you help clients to find where that line lives?
Yeah, it's a bit of an odd take for someone who's looking to do communications advisory work with clients to say, hey, maybe you need to do less communicating. And it's not like a hard and fast rule, but having worked in organizations that have really large communication teams, I've worked for organizations that globally have, a couple hundred people working in communications. And I've worked in organizations that have no comms, right? And what I've learned is even at the organizations with no comms, the sky didn't fall, so information still gets communicated, maybe just not in the way that we as communication professionals would think is ideal. But I think what that's taught me is as long as you've got the right message delivered really clearly from the right person or people, and it goes to the right person or people, that's all you need. It may not require, a full all hands meeting and a newsletter article and a Teams channel or a Slack message campaign, plus an email from the CEO. It may not need all that, right? And internally, few people are actually going to see all those things. And then when you talk about externally, same thing. If you're really trying to get something across to just one audience, just one community, focus on how they'll receive it rather than, oh, we need to blast this out. We need to make the massive news of this. Focus on that audience or that person or that team that needs to receive it, what they need to hear, and go that direction. I think in teams where there are a lot of people, we make a case, well, we should do all these different channels because we have them and we have people to manage them. But I think, it's also important to think about how it's received. And it's so rare that someone's going to be receiving it in all those channels. And as long as they're receiving it in the right one at the right time, you've done your job.
I completely agree.
True.
And that is contrary to what we see overall in today's world. It feels like everybody thinks that more is the best. And it really isn't. And I think what happens is that things really get lost in that quantity, that volume. You lose those quality things that will stick, the things that people will remember. You just don't remember anymore because it's not resonating, because there's just so much being thrown at you. So it feels like a fire hose of information and you take in a tidbit here or there and that's it. And I agree on corporate channels because you get stuff in email, you get it in Slack or Teams, you get it everywhere. And it's just like, you kind of tune out. Yeah. It just feels like more information, not information that's really for me, that's going to make a difference to me. That's something that I care about. So I love that you are calling that out. And I think, that's tough. I don't think it's tough for PR pros who understand that to really grasp that concept. I think the tough part is really a process of getting your clients to
Mhm.
live by that rule. That's the tougher part, because they always think that everything has to be, and they're thinking about algorithms, which also are not favoring volume these days, but they're thinking about that, and
Right.
they blast
Right.
everything to everybody, and they want to do 10,000 things at one time. And
Mhm.
telling them,
Mhm.
yeah, I'm going to need you to do this one thing. Like,
Yeah.
just
And you're so right. I think the algorithm, analogy works across the board. Certainly externally, we know algorithms are driving how people are hearing and receiving our information. And I think that does kind of lend itself into, oh, well, we've got to hit them from every angle because the algorithm may hide it, and I think that's led to us not thinking about, what lands, where does it need to land specifically? What will make people really believe it? Act on it, lean into it, so that nothing gets lost. And it is harder now with sort of the algorithms kind of dictating how things get to people or don't.
Yes. Yes. I don't know anymore. I feel like the algorithms are just madness.
And changing by the second, right? So you learn it and then you go, oh, now I've got to learn
So
it again.
true. Yeah. And you're like, so
That's why I think
all the more reason. Yeah.
yeah, that's I was going to say that's why
To do
I
your
think it's
thing.
almost like you know, I wouldn't say ignore algorithms, but definitely like communicate what you believe needs to be communicated, what that person or audience needs to hear and receive, when they need to hear it, receive it in the way that you know or believe that they'll receive it best. And because the algorithms are changing day by day, you may or may not hit every time, but if you hit them from every audience or every channel all the time, they're just going to tune you out going forward. They're not going to know what's important because you're hitting them so much. So yeah, I think we almost again don't ignore the algorithms, but don't let them dictate your communications.
Right.
We could have a whole conversation about that, and we might do that on another cast. But as you were talking about that, I remember this was just like a really dumb example, but it was meaningful. Someone was talking about, when you're watching streaming shows and you stop watching a show and you come back and you want to continue watching, how sometimes you have to click through so many things to just get that thing you're watching, because the algorithm, it thinks that it knows you. And so it's serving up stuff on your homepage, but that's not what you came there for. You came there to watch that show that you were watching 4 weeks ago, and you just want to be able to click that button and not go through that whole thing.
Right.
And it just, to me, what that says is that this ties into this larger argument about why we need human judgment, because you think you know what people want, but you kind of don't. And something like that shows me that, technology can figure out a lot of things, but sometimes it does make things harder. And sometimes it buries the right information. It buries the thing that's most important to you. If you've ever gone to a social media site and tried to find that article that you had started reading, but then you had to go take a client call, you're like, I was interested in that. I want to see that. And you have to just it's like, where is it?
Yeah, it happens to me all the time in my, I'll be scrolling through Instagram or something and you see a post and you want to show it to somebody and you show it to them and the screen refreshes and then you go, oh my God, I'm never going to find that again.
It's the worst. It's like, don't look away. It's going to disappear.
Which I think is horrible that that's the way that the algorithm works. But it's not human. And we have to keep drumming, that message home, that technology has its place, but it's not a human being.
Right.
And no to all the companies out there who are firing seasoned workers for quote unquote AI natives. I have to caution you that the one thing that you're losing that you're not thinking about is that institutional knowledge, but you're missing out on experience that can strategically use those AI tools and pick up what it's missing. Because, I love Claude, but he's not a human being.
Right.
Yeah, he's not everything. And also,
Yeah, and he wasn't in the room that one time when
right,
something went awry, and you were, and you know how to solve
right?
it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I say
Claude's
he like it's a he. I mean, we're talking about Claude like he is a person, but yeah, it's true. I think that goes back to sort of my advisor-led AI-powered mindset, right? Is that there is a level of judgment that you have to have. These tools hallucinate sometimes, and even
Mhm,
when they're not hallucinating, they're giving you true information. It may just feel a little off the wall or kind of
mhm.
crazy to use in your work. I mean, I've gotten in research sometimes, I'm like, it might mix up a company name, things like that. Just
Mm,
there is such an important human layer in all of
Yeah.
this that, Karen, I completely agree with you. When you're trading out, an employee with institutional knowledge and judgment for, AI can do that, you're really not. Like your AI can do a lot, but it's not a human. It doesn't have the same judgment that person does. And
Yeah.
I would love to see companies leaning more into training those employees to become
yes.
AI, to use AI in their roles and become
Yeah.
even better, smarter, faster, rather than saying, oh,
Absolutely.
I think
I would
they're
love that.
too
I think
impatient,
some are doing it, but
and they have this mindset because
yeah,
I'm
Yeah.
reading about people that saw ahead of the trend and started studying on their own and learning things, and they got fired anyway
Mhm.
because companies felt like, oh, it's going to take them too long to ramp up. But when you have been an expert in an industry, learning a new tool is something that you've been doing for years.
yeah,
I mean,
Right.
we worked our way through a lot of tools. So just
Yeah.
because you're 45
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you're too stupid to learn something new.
Yeah.
Quite the contrary, it means that you probably will master it in a much different, quicker way than somebody who's not gone through so
right.
many rounds of
Right.
learning and pivoting. And what you said, they've been in rooms.
Yeah,
You could have a
Exactly.
perfectly good scenario laid out by AI, but AI doesn't know about that time
right.
that this thing happened that was so major and it taught you a lesson about something to look for that you're not going to find in Chat GPT. That's
Right.
Yep.
human experience that can say,
Yeah.
that would be good, except I know to look for this thing that happened that I have worked into every comms plan since then
Yep.
because it is a possibility. You don't know that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. AI is not going to protect you from yourself at the end
True.
of the day. That's what
Yeah.
we need the humans for.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Oh my goodness. Well, while we're talking about things like high stakes comms, you've gone through a lot of different situations in corporate that you've navigated. You've navigated layoffs, leadership transitions, like we were just talking about, crisis moments and
Mhm.
preparation for that. What's one thing we know being at the table certainly is important, but is there another thing you wish more organizations understood before these things happen as opposed to after? Learning the
Yeah,
hard
I
way.
mean, definitely bringing comms in early, like we talked about
Mhm.
earlier, is really important. I think also for me, something that and again, this comes from having been in those rooms. It's not something that an AI tool can necessarily clock. Is the leaders that are sort of championing or being the spokespeople during big moments of change. Um, I think it's really important that, and this is a bit of a buzzword, but I really believe this, that their authenticity comes through.
Mm.
And this
Mhm.
may feel a little contrarian, but I feel like sometimes that's even more important than maybe the message. And here's why I say that, because I think you can equip leaders with the best talking points and messages, ever. They can be perfect. But if that leader is inauthentic, meaning how they show up with those messages is different than how they showed up, over coffee in the break room yesterday when you spoke to them about the same topic, trust is lost,
Mhm.
right? Maybe not a ton of trust, and you may not even perceive it. But if you're in front of an audience with talking points and you sound like a completely different person, and I'm not just talking about tone, right? I know that you need to have a different tone on, an investor call than you do in a break room. I get that, right? I'm saying, if you're kind of just flipping a switch and becoming almost a robot, or you're saying things that the person in the coffee room wouldn't have said, people are going to wonder which of these personalities is real? Who am I really getting? And can I believe what they're saying, either to me in the coffee room or to this, on this investor call, which is true. And so I feel really strongly that, authenticity and coming across as, the same person. Again, you can vary your tone per audience, but it shouldn't feel like a completely different person is delivering messages across different audiences. And I've over my career have worked with a lot of leaders. Some are brilliant at this, right? And then some really struggle. They get in front of an audience or at a global town hall even, and just really struggle to bring themselves to the table. And it just creates a perception among, whoever's listening to them that, this person's got a few different ways of being, and I'm not sure which one is real. And to me, that's really important. Again, sometimes overshadows even what they're saying. So really important to train on messages, but also on being authentic.
Yeah.
And I guess, part of that too is if the leader can't be authentic, a lot of this is super coachable, right? It's very coachable, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes the leaders either don't want to be coached. I think I'm perfect. And in that case, maybe it's a suggestion that certain messages are delivered by other leaders, right? I think that's a little bit more of an extreme kind of scenario, and it's not about you're bad at this, you're doing this terribly. It's really about here's how we want this to land. And here's what we think needs to happen to make it land that way. I think authenticity and messaging are at least of equal importance.
Yeah, definitely. And it gives that consistency that the business world loves. Of course, we like consistency. We don't like surprises. So if anything can rattle that, it's not going to be good for you. But oh my goodness. This has been such a great conversation. We are so glad that you joined us today. Now, where can our listeners find you online to connect with you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Kara Ryan, and then Clear Strategies. My website is clearstrategies.com. That's KLYR strategies.com. But yeah, those are both great ways to get in touch.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, to our listeners, we hope you've gotten a lot out of this. And of course you did. And if you've yet to make the jump to becoming a solo, we hope this inspired you to check it out and maybe make that move. And until next time, thanks for listening to That Solo Life.